Old School Lane Casual Chats is brought to you by Old School Lane, producing various content from blogs, videos, and podcasts discussing about movies, TV shows, video games, and everything else in between since 2011. You can check out the podcast on Anchor, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Radio Public, Overcast, Breaker, Pocket Cast, and YouTube. We're associated with Channel Frederator, Manic Expression, The Comic Book Cast, and The Arun Mehta Show. Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Casual Chats. I am Patricia, and I'm here with Arun Mehta from The Arun Mehta Show.
Hello there.
So today we're going to be talking about a movie that just came out a few months ago on September 8th of 2022. We're going to be talking about one of the cajillion music biographies. We're talking about Weird, the Al Yankovic Story. So for those who tuned into Crystal Skull a while ago, where we did Hidden Gems Month, we talked about the 1989 film UHF starring Weird Al Yankovic. And as you guys know, that movie was a financial bomb when it came out in theaters because there were a lot of other movies that came out at the time. And so Weird Al had took a massive break from doing his own movies for almost 30 years until eventually he did a Funny or Die skit about 10 years ago where it was quote unquote a music biopic on his own life, and it was as exaggerative as you thought it was. And then along the way, Weird Al, as well as the same person who co-wrote and directed that short, Eric Apple, they decided to come together and say, let's make a theatrical film on this. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today.
And by the way, everybody, anyone who's thinking that this is actually the Weird Al Yankovic story, no, this is definitely not the Weird Al Yankovic story that you're probably thinking about. So,
yeah, exactly.
This is a parody of a biopic. Basically, this is, dare I say, this could potentially be the parody to end all parodies, basically, I guess you could say.
Yeah, and I guess it makes a lot of sense considering that over the past few years, we have seen music biopics based off of really well-known artists and musicians. We saw one for Queen, Elton John, Elvis, and various others. So Weird Al Yankovic, being the crazy genius that he is, decided to make a biopic based off of his own life. And this isn't the first time that he did this. He did one in the 80s where it was basically a biopic on himself that was more or less based off of a Beatles documentary that was out around the same time. And so him making fun of himself is not too much of a surprise. And if you have seen the Funny or Die short around 10 years ago, then it kind of follows more or less the same premise in which Weird Al starts off from nothing and he's told by his family that his stuff is really weird and that he should act normal. He meets up with Dr. Demento. He becomes very successful overnight. He has a very, very wild relationship with Madonna. He goes off the deep end, and then it just spirals into chaotic disaster. So basically, it's a longer version of that. So if you're going to jump into this thinking that you're watching a biopic of Weird Al Yankovic based off of his own life, don't bother.
Yeah, I mean, going back to the 1980s biopic that he did, I mean, this would actually also, in itself, also, the Beatles parody also would be taken on by the Animaniacs and also by the Powerpuff Girls as well. So,
Yeah, exactly.
this also kind of, in itself was also was parodied in itself. And I think
Yes.
there's one thing interesting discussion I would like to have, and that is that there's one problem with this though. To this day, and people will be quite shocked to hear this, I've never seen This Is Spinal Tap. Even though it's been like, isn't that in itself like a mock documentary on like a rock band in itself?
Exactly,
So,
yeah.
yeah,
It's based off of a mockumentary based off of a fictional rock band that is following the lives of this particular group of people who started off pretty small around the 60s, became really big around the 80s, and then was just lowered down into their gigs are so low that they're in order for them to make ends meet, they play their music at birthday parties and funerals.
yeah. I just think that's. I mean, is there any like parallels between Spinal Tap and what this movie that we're talking about? Do you think, or
Yes, you could say that, but the difference is that Spinal Tap was a fictional band, while Weird Al Yankovic is a real person, and they're trying to state that no, this is the actual life of Weird Al Yankovic, of him starting off as a kid whose parents did not approve of him playing the accordion, and then eventually when he grows up he starts finding his passion for doing parody music, and then he becomes really really big. And so it's basically doing a parody very similar to what we've seen in other mockumentaries over the past few years. If you could believe it, you remember the Naked Brothers band from Nickelodeon?
oh yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, so that was a mockumentary in itself.
Oh
You
yeah,
see, it was
that
about
was.
these two
Yeah.
boys who, are supposed to be like, the biggest, stars in the world. And, it's basically about them as kids having to deal with that. But no, that wasn't actually true. They were just like regular kids, and their parents even helped executive produce this. And eventually it became like really big, into the point to which they even got their own series.
Yeah, it's kind of like this kind of with Weird. It's more like this kind of like blur of like what is fake and what is real. I think in all this, I mean, like the whole story basically is like a fictional story pretty much, but it stars a real person, and some of the things that are like co-opted into it. I mean, you could say maybe it is kind of weird like watching this movie, because you're kind of sitting there like, is this really how Weird Al Yankovic feels about some of the things that have happened, like throughout his life, going all the way
Right.
from his childhood all the way up to that? Because I mean, obviously in this movie, the relationship that he has with his parents is radically different from like the real life relationship I believe that he had with his parents in that, and also the fact that they I mean, he lost his parents actually in quite tragic circumstances, really. So
Oh,
like
yes, he
yeah,
did.
yeah,
So
it's quite
around
amazing really that
the
he would write.
2000s,
Yeah, I
that
mean,
was when. Oh, go ahead.
yeah, but before we get, I mean, like, it's quite, the one thing I would say before we get into, like, that topic is that it's kind of, when you're about to describe basically what happened, but it's kind of weird to think about that, he would write these types of characters while, when you go really into the backstory of, like, what really happened to his parents, really.
Exactly,
Yeah.
yeah. So I guess we can just preface this by saying we're going to go into some major spoilers. If you have not seen Weird, the Al Yankovic movie, then please go check it out on Roku and then come back to listen to our discussion.
Yeah, well, I think, yeah, we're going to go from top to bottom as we normally do on this, so yeah, if you've not watched this already, then quite frankly, go watch it, seriously.
Yes, absolutely. So yeah, let's start off with the backstory of Weird Al Yankovic. So we see him as a young kid, and he is very interested in writing these parody songs because he listens to Dr. Demento a lot. Now, for those who don't know who Dr. Demento is, Dr. Demento is a very very well known radio broadcaster who plays novelty songs. It's not like your songs that you would typically hear on the radio. These are like really weird, obscure songs with crazy melodies and insane lyrics. And he was like really big around the 70s and 80s, where, he was like playing through these kind of weird, crazy songs, and a lot of people who were, I would say, not considered to be like going for the mainstream taste of music. That's where they would lean over towards. And Weird Al Yankovic in real life and in this movie loved Dr. Demento. And we see in the movie that he is listening to him. He has his whole room decorated with Dr. Demento stuff. And then his mother comes in and tells him that he shouldn't be listening to that because because that's bad for, his well-being, and that he should listen to normal music. And then we go over to the other scene in which when we meet up with his father, and he starts learning more about what he's been up to with, writing parodic music. I mean, he even did a parody song of Amazing Grace by singing Amazing Grapes. And his father is just like really angry with him, saying that he shouldn't be into that kind of stuff, and that instead, when he grows up, he should be working at the factory so that he can be able to make himself a real human being, making ends meet, working at a job that they hate because that's what you're supposed to do.
Yeah, it makes me really wonder, like, is this how Weird Al perceived himself at a young age? Like, he was the way that he saw his creativity was the fact that he, wanted to do these, very out there things, but the way that he's perceived, like everywhere else, like, oh, it's the job at the factory, and no one really knows what the factory is, and but in real life, if you worked at a factory, you'd know what they were like producing and what they were doing and stuff like that. Like if you had a real job, basically what was going on within that.
Yeah.
And,
and by the way,
I guess is that how he's like? Is that how Weird Al like sees like just the regular everyday? Like it's just people kind of like doing like tasks for like, but not really knowing for what an end goal is. Like it just is that the one thing I'll say about this movie is that it's I don't know if this is like playing into Weird Al's psyche in some way, like how he perceives the world, and this is kind of like an extravagant view of how he perceives real life, and it's the one thing that's quite good about this movie is that it's while the whole thing sounds absolutely bonkers, the whole way that the whole thing is like portrayed, it's an interesting insight into how it seems to be how Weird Al Yankovic seems to tick on the inside. It's kind of like a journey into his inner mind when you really look at it.
Yeah, well, his parents were the complete opposite, in which literally his father would tell him that the key to success was doing for a living whatever makes you happy. They actually encouraged him to be very creative. Like when in the scene in the movie, as well as what happened in real life, a door-to-door salesman was traveling around their neighborhood and offered an accordion, and Al was like really, really fascinated by this, and he wanted to actually play the accordion because he wanted to have at least one more accordion playing Yankovic in the world, which is a reference to the famous accordion player Frankie Yankovic. And he also chose the accordion because, quote, they were convinced it would revolutionize rock and roll. And even though that his mother did not let him outside the house very often, he actually did have the time to practice the accordion, and he would go over to a music school and learn how to play the accordion. So this whole thing about like the accordion is in, and his mother was like very fearful that his father would be really upset about him playing the accordion, and then his father actually sees the accordion and actually beats the shit out of the door-to-door salesman to a bloody pulp, and he's just laying on the floor bleeding while his mother was telling Al about how, having an accordion in the house is not a good thing, and that he should even forget about it until she eventually does buy it for him. And even the door-to-door salesman was like saying that this is a very sweet moment, and then she just tells him to shush off. They're having like intimacy with, between a mother and a son. So it definitely does play off as like the really over the top, frantic moments that you would expect for a Weird Al project to have. So again, it's like taking similar things to what happened to his real life, but then go completely out of the walls 360 degrees with basically showcasing that no, this didn't actually happen.
Yeah, I mean, like the one thing I'll say about that scene is like it's this is where Robot Chicken, South Park, and there's a third thing that was in my Family Guy. This is where they basically were in their prime. Basically, like, this type of humor. I think that's basically what kind of like, put them on the map. You got this other like moment where, they're having like this thing together, but then at the same time you have something that's kind of like, oh, hey, there's, something else that you're supposed to feel about that scene as well. And I think it's done perfectly, I think, in that regard. I mean, like, those two types of balances and then putting them all together into that scene and playing it off for laughs as well. I think it works out surprisingly well when you think about it. Yeah.
And so we have Weird Al who's like in the closet practicing his accordion until he eventually becomes a teenager and he meets up with a group of kids who are having this party and that they should
Yeah, before we get into
invite
that, I mean,
Al over so that he can be a
but before we get into that, I mean, have you noticed like there's quite a lot of like, I mean, I don't know if you noticed this or not. I mean, there seems to be quite a bit of LGBTQ symbolism in all of this. Like, he's in the closet playing his accordion, and like he's got like, and this is the, the reality of like some people who are on, in the LGBTQ community, like the fact that they have this, passion for something else, and the fact that they have to kind of like hide it away from their parents. In that, so like, there's a lot of it like that kind of like symbolism in that, in those moments. I don't know, like, I know that's not supposed to be kind of like what it's supposed to be, but I mean, it definitely does seem to play, to that's in that direction.
I never really thought of that. I don't think that that was the intention of Weird Al, but I can definitely see it for people who would interpret it as that.
Yeah, but I mean, like, even then, I would say that this is like your traditional. In a way, it is traditional in the sense that this is the traditional story of like the kid of the family wants to go out and have this adventure, and the dad's really stubborn and doesn't want him to do it, and will do everything to go. And he's doing it out of love because he wants to protect his son. But obviously, there's this misunderstanding between the two, and the mom's just kind of like along for the ride. Like it's just it's and also is well-meaning as well. So the one thing I will say about this movie is that the characters surprisingly are well written. They know who they are, they know why they're there, and then their actions are somewhat understandable. They're not understandable at the very beginning of the movie, but we'll get to the end of the movie when we get to it. But that's one thing I will say. From when watching this.
We have this really well done narration where it talks about Weird Al's life and it goes like beat for beat towards his childhood and towards his teenagehood. And we go over to the scene in which when Al is invited by two teenagers and they're saying, we're going to invite you over to this party. And Al is basically saying, no, I'm not allowed to go to this party. I have to my curfew's at a certain time. And so they told him the classic line about like, why don't you just sneak out? And this party, it turns out to be a polka party.
Yeah, and the setup is actually quite generic when you really think about it, but the payoff is actually quite hilarious. About like it's like, oh, it's a polka party. It's like, what?
Yeah,
it's like it's
exactly
yeah.
How many kids have you ever heard of would be throwing a polka party at like a school night?
But it's just like it's the whole scenario of like here's Weird Al who really loves the accordion, wants to play it, and like but has promised never to kind of like go out to show anybody that he can actually do it, and then all of a sudden there's out of all the things that could be going on, it's a polka party. Like he just plays the hilarity of the situation.
I mean, we have that scene in which when he's playing the accordion and everybody is just like in awe of him. And, he's feeling for the first time in his life like he's being accepted because at home, he's always been told by his parents that he should not do the things that he loves to do. And so he's very closeted. And so finally at this polka party, he's able to play the accordion. Everybody's cheering for him. Everybody's rooting for him. And he just has this sense of just glee that he finally knows what he wants to do in life. He wants to write parody songs and he wants to play the accordion. And then we have this hilarious scene in which when the police, they rankate the party and then he's brought home by his, he's brought home and they told his parents, we caught your son at a polka party, and they're just like shocked. It's almost like, we caught your son at a club and he was doing drugs. So it just makes that even more hilarious.
Yeah, like I mean, it obviously is hilarious for what it is, and but I don't know, like it was yeah, that was kind of random. How like the police turned up, and apparently having polka parties is somewhat illegal in wherever he is living in. Like, actually, that's an interesting question. I completely forgot. Did he stay where he actually lived? Which state he was in, or like?
I think it was California.
It was in. Oh, okay then. So, apparently polka parties are illegal in California in this world.
Yes, I guess so. Anyway, so we have this really nice scene where Al and his dad were arguing about that he's had this accordion all this time and that he's been acting like a freak and that he should consider working at the factory. And that is when Al decided that he just couldn't be like his dad. And eventually, when he gets older, he actually moves away and he goes over to school and he has his roommates, Steve, Jim, and Bermuda, where Al is like auditioning for all of these bands, and nobody is interested in an accordion playing musician. And they tell him, you're gonna find your niche. People are going to be seeing you as this genius, so don't worry about it. It'll come over due time. And then that's when the song My Sharona plays in the radio. And that's when it inspired him to write My Bologna. And then everybody is just like really awed by this amazing, quick talent. And it's actually funny because Daniel Radcliffe is not singing My Bologna. It's actually Weird Al's voice dubbed over Daniel Radcliffe.
Yeah, but Daniel Radcliffe plays it so well. And by the way, actually, I mean, I'm surprised we've actually not brought up this as a topic. Daniel Radcliffe is playing Weird Al Yankovic. You know, Harry Potter. Like,
Yeah.
you know, that's just so it's almost like Johnny Depp moment, kind of like in a while, like, you know, oh hey, this guy was Captain Sparrow, yeah, like Jack Sparrow, like from Pirates of the Caribbean. And then all of a sudden, like, you know, he's John Dillinger out of like that gangster movie, and it's like it just feels so so weird. So I think that this guy was like fighting Voldemort at one point, and then all of a sudden now he's Weird Al Yankovic in this movie. It's like,
Well, I mean, that's not the weirdest role he's been a part of. I think that Guns Akimbo really takes it up there as
he's done independent
horror comedy about a guy who has guns stapled to his hand.
He's done independent movies like that. I'm not saying that he's not done other weird stuff, but I mean, like this, like I've not, in regards to like Daniel Radcliffe. I mean, the last time I saw him, honest to God, was probably in Harry Potter, and now all of a sudden, like here I am seeing him with more fluffier hair and a mustache,
Yeah. And the Hawaiian shirt.
Yeah, you're weird, Harry.
You're a weirdo, Harry. Anyway, it's actually funny because Weird Al Yankovic actually did see Daniel Radcliffe in an interview with Graham Norton at the Graham Norton Show, and Daniel was mentioning about how he loved musicians such as Tom Lehrer, and he actually sang a rendition of the song "The Elements," and they were like, "Yeah, he's going to be our Weird Al for this movie." And it was even funny because there was even another interview that came out shortly after the movie where they actually were saying that they regret not having Daniel sing as Weird Al, but instead having that dub. But they said that due to the humor and comedy and the tone of the movie, they think that it probably fits. So. I mean, I would have liked to have heard Daniel singing as Weird Al for this movie, but I can kind of see where they were coming from with the joke.
I mean, again, I don't know how they shot these scenes, but I don't know if they did it where they had Daniel Radcliffe actually sing the songs, in the scenes, and then I don't know if they made a decision of like, oh, well, shall we go with Daniel Radcliffe's renditions, or shall we go with Weird Al Yankovic's renditions? And dub them over, and I don't know. Again, I'm not seeing how the behind the scenes of this movie, so I don't know exactly like what decisions were made. But I mean, I could probably imagine maybe they, if I was deciding this, maybe I would have done both, and then in the post production, I would have said, okay, what are we going to go with here? And because I mean, they're both the same song at the end of the day, like regardless of who's singing it. So I mean, you could easily like put one over the other, pretty much. So
yeah. I'm sure that if Roku ever did extras, I would have loved to have seen, what Daniel Radcliffe would have sounded like if they would have kept with his voice as opposed to Weird Al's.
Yeah, that'd be interesting to see if we ever get that.
Yeah. So continuing on, Al finally has an opportunity to perform at a bar, and it is a very dark, seedy bar filled with these drunkards, and they're just booing at every performance that's going on, and Al is like really nervous, but he performs I Love Rocky Road, and just so happens that Dr. Demento happens to have been there watching the performance, and he even invites him over to a party, and it just so happens to be like this crazy party filled with a lot of celebrity cameos. You have Wolfman Jack, you have Pee Wee Herman, you have Divine. It's like, wow, like look at all these people that they were able to like do these performances, and they actually do it spot on. Although that Jack Black's performance as Wolfman Jack, I mean, he sounds pretty normal. When if you ever heard Wolfman Jack on the radio, he has like this really raspy voice. I can't even do it. Go look it up on YouTube. But Jack Black does a really good job as Wolfman Jack. It's like almost perfect casting, Wolfman Jack Black. It's like, that's great.
I mean, like, yeah, I think Jack Black was doing Wolfman Jack. I think was good casting in that regard. And as we know, like, as of this recording, he's currently going to be Bowser in the next Super Mario movie. And we know how gruff he can, how much roaring of his voice can be. And so he's good at doing those.
And he's probably going to be the best part of the movie.
Yeah, but here's the thing, like, he's good at doing these types of voices, but at the same time, he will be Po from Kung Fu Panda and sound, comical and sound, interesting at the same time. Yeah. So, like, that's the one great strength about Jack Black is that he is not, restricted to one type of performance. But if you do put him in a performance that is going to suit him down to a T, he's going to deliver, and that's what he does for Wolfman Jack in this once again. Yes. So that's great in itself. And the one thing I'll say about the bar scene, just before we kind of like leave it, is that I'm really glad they went with that, because what do you think, what one other parody do you think they would have done in this movie, you think, when he was going to do, like, his first performance? What do you think it would have been?
I mean, there are a lot of Weird Al songs I can think of, but...
Well, no, I'm not talking about the songs, I'm talking about the scene. What one movie do you think they would parody, in a situation like that? I'll tell you what it is.
What's that?
8 Mile.
Oh! Where you have like a group of musicians and they're going like toe to toe up against each other.
Well, yeah, they could have easily have turned this into an Eminem parody, and I'm really glad that they didn't. And so, like,
I mean, it wouldn't have made that much sense considering that this is the 80s and 8 Mile came out around the 2000s.
Yeah, but regardless, you could see them doing it, couldn't you? Like, which,
fair enough.
And they didn't think, like, to their credit, they didn't. And they decided that, hey, we're going to do this, this rough bar scene, which, I've seen probably, like, in the SpongeBob SquarePants movie, and I've also seen, like, in that episode of The Simpsons when, remember the Laurie and Lumpkin episode when Homer goes to Spittle County and finds that barmaid? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that one.
And also going back to the Pee Wee Herman thing again, in Pee Wee's Big Adventure, Pee Wee goes over to a biker bar and he actually does the tequila dance, and everybody's just going crazy for it.
Yeah, and would you believe Pee Wee Herman's actually in this movie?
Well, I mean, not actually Paul Rubens, but yes.
No, but the character Pee Wee Herman, he's actually
the character was in this movie, yeah. Which makes a lot of sense because around the early 80s, he would have been really big with doing his stuff on the Groundlings and with the David Letterman show and doing various amounts of other short skits until eventually he did
like every 80s kind of like, every 80s star is pretty much in that scene. Like, even Mr. T's in that scene, I think, if I recall.
Yes,
yeah,
Mr.
exactly.
T's in that scene. Yeah, there's just a lot of like crazy cameos. It's like blink and you miss it, but if you know who they are, you know who they are.
And if you've got a Roku anyway, you can just rewind it and watch, find out who was there. And that's one thing I'll say about Weird Al, the Weird Al movie. Like, it's just it's very meta as well. Like, it's got all sorts of like little like mentions to like all sorts of things in there. Pretty much.
Yeah. I mean, even Salvador Dali is at this pool party. Like, what?
Well, of course. Why not?
Salvador Dali go over to a pool party with Dr. Demento. I mean, I don't know if he did that in real life, but if
I highly doubt it.
Awesome.
Yeah, I mean, like, here's the thing about this. Like, this is pretty much what's going on in Weird Al's head. I think I could probably imagine, and I can guarantee you, like, the vast majority of the presentation is not based in reality, but it kind of goes into probably what Weird Al is probably going into his mind and what he thinks about things. Maybe, I don't know. So
yeah. But still, you have a surreal painter going over to a pool party with this really crazy niche radio DJ. Like, okay, yeah, the same guy that you know of who did the famous paintings such as The Great Masturbator and Soft Construction with Boiled Beans is the same guy who's going over to a radio DJ who's known for playing Barnes and Barnes fish heads.
Yeah, of course. Why not?
Of course.
It's Weird Al.
Anyway. So we have this scene going back into Wolfman Jack again. So Wolfman Jack sees Weird Al as this really pretentious, uncreative schlock who shouldn't even be like up there with all the other musicians, and he even challenges him to just write a parody song on the spot. And there's a bit of a hesitation, and then Wolfman Jack's basically like, "Yeah, I know it. He's nothing more than just this, you know, two-bit hack who's just getting his 15 minutes in fame, and then that's it." But then immediately he starts singing "Another One Rides the Bus," which is the Queen's parody song of "Another One Bites the Dust," which is actually funny because there's actually what you call it? There was actually a member from Queen who was actually there who invited him over to do the opening act of their concert, and Weird Al said, "Hell no." So that was actually pretty funny.
So, yeah, that was that scene pretty much. Like
Yeah.
it's like I mean, to say that it's one of the most random parts of the movie, I think is going to be, it's definitely, trying to find the best word for it. It's let's just say like there's gonna just get yourself prepared because there's gonna be far more randomness in this movie as we go forward.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So now we go over to the scene in which when Weird Al decides to pitch his music over to a record studio, and that record studio just so happens to be the same record studio that would eventually pick him up, and they basically like listen to his music and they just have absolutely no interest in it whatsoever.
And the
And just so
hilarious thing
happens
about
he
this is that the guy who's being the owner of playing the owner of the music studio is Weird Al Yankovic himself.
Yeah, that's actually really funny that Weird Al Yankovic is actually playing as this record producer and telling him, "Your music sucks. We don't want you." So that's actually really, really funny.
And again, it makes you wonder: is that his perception of the music industry? Pretty much, like, is that how he sees things?
Mm.
Yeah, which probably wouldn't be too far from the truth because I mean, like, the music industry doesn't seem to like too much creativity, like unless you're Billie Eilish or unless you're like somebody else who's able to really stand out and like give yourself like a really massive cult following. But besides that. Like he's sort of kind of got it a little bit to a T really about how he sees music in a way, or at least away from parodies anyway. So.
Yeah, I guess so. I guess it's kind of like the classic trope about like, you have this underdog and they're trying to make it big out there, but the record companies don't want you because you just don't have that essence of popularity and mainstream notoriety that should be able to come naturally towards you. You're just too weird or you're too basic or you need more practice or whatever. So it definitely plays into that trope, which is actually done pretty well considering that, again, Weird Al is telling Weird Al, "No, your music sucks."
Yeah, it's well, I mean, it's how I could probably imagine he thinks of the music industry, and so I think that's it sort of reminds me like the obviously going back to UHF, it sort of reminds me of like the guy who owned the rival TV studio at the time, like
Yeah.
it sort of reminded me of him a little bit.
Yeah, although not as remotely over the top, but yeah, I could definitely see the parallels between the two characters.
Yeah.
All right, so eventually Weird Al does make it pretty big. His music starts going all over the radios, and he's this huge platinum winner. We have this interview with Oprah Winfrey where he's saying about how amazing he is with writing music, that he wears all of his platinum records on himself, and they're like, who knows how much weight it is. It looks really, really heavy. And he becomes this huge celebrity. He owns a mansion. Everybody knows who he is. He's really popular. The only thing that is weighing him down are that he has no assurance of his parents' approval. So he calls up his mom and finds out if they know about his popularity. They're well aware of it. They're just not very proud of him.
Yeah, I mean, like, it's kind of like hilarious when you see like the whole like interview segments he's doing like with Oprah because I mean, this was like was this before or after we went to see Straight No Chasers?
I think that's a good question. I'm trying to think. Maybe it was before.
Maybe it was because, like, if you remember, like, in the very beginning of the show, like, it was they were showing, like, pretty much them doing parodies of like being interviewed by like Oprah and like things like that. if you remember. It's like so like it was sort of a weird coincidence that we also got that too.
Yeah, it is a bit of a weird coincidence, but I can kind of see why they decided to include it, though.
Yeah, but I just I thought it was kind of hilarious that you and I, saw Oprah Winfrey being parodied in like two different types of shows.
Yeah, I would say that there is a bit of a mix up between the time periods of this story, where they have like some showcases of a bit of the 80s and 90s, but mostly it is sticking over toward like the 80s. So there's only one scene in which it does take place around the 80s, but they do play a song that's from the 90s, but we'll get to that later.
Yeah.
Anyway, so Al is very, very disappointed that he was not able to get his parents' approval, especially his father, who is wanting him to work at that factory. And so Al decides that he's no longer going to write parody songs. He's going to write his own original music. And it just so happens to be Eat It by Michael Jackson's Beat It. And the only way he was able to think of this song was that Dr. Demento was in his bathtub and he was eating chips with guacamole. Weird Al takes a bite of it, and that guacamole is laced with LSD.
Good grief.
Like, okay, so let me get this straight. You're trying to tell me, Weird Al, that you were able to come up with some of your best parodic music with LSD. I mean,
like if you remember back in the back in the psychedelic rock days, a lot of like creators took drugs to like write their songs. Pretty much.
Yeah, that is true, but I never would have expected Weird Al to be one of those people.
Well, we don't know that for a fact. We don't know if that was just a parody in itself of like, oh hey, here's an artist taking drugs to like motivate himself to write stuff. Like it's.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't know about. I don't think about the. I don't think he did drugs, and I know especially he didn't do alcohol.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like this in itself could be a parody of like him. Doing what he's doing exactly. Like
yeah,
this
exactly.
is the thing with
like,
this movie. You don't know what's truth and you don't know what's fiction. I just think it's whatever's going on in Weird Al's mind is kind of like being projected onto the screen. I think.
Yeah, I know for one thing, I do remember hearing this in an interview that he never drank alcohol because his parents were very, very religious and he comes from a very clean background. So he just never took a sip of alcohol. He had no interest in drinking it. So seeing this movie in which eventually he goes on his downward slope of him just drinking alcohol and doing drugs. So I just find that to be okay. I get what they're trying to do. It's kind of like the hilarious story about like the celebrity who starts off small and then becomes really big, but then they let their ego take over them and then they start doing drugs and alcohol to cope with all the pressure and the depression that they're going through as artists. So I guess that they're playing with that trope, which is actually pretty hilarious.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so he comes up with his quote unquote original song.
Yeah,
and
I was like,
yeah.
it was just it's. I mean, at one point I was like, does Weird Al actually feel this way about Eat It? Like, he's just like, is this?
There have been stories about how he wanted to parody a lot of songs from Michael Jackson, but he got so many cease and desist orders.
Yeah, well, that you know what, Michael Jackson doing that probably wouldn't surprise me. Like,
Yeah, he was able to parody some of his songs, like "Eat It" with "Beat It" and "I'm Fat" with various others. But you get what we're trying to say.
Yeah,
So.
exactly. Yeah.
Anyway, so yeah, there was originally around the 90s where he wanted to do a parody of Black and White, but Michael Jackson sent him a massive cease and desist order, and then he took all of his strides to making the other song that would pretty much get him back as his major comeback, which is Smells Like Nirvana. But it's funny enough because that song didn't appear in this movie, but Amish Paradise did, which again, I know they're just like mixing up the timelines of like when these songs were performed. But yeah, I mean, because this is a fake documentary about Weird Al Yankovic's life, I'm not gonna hold it against.
Well, it's not really even a documentary. It's like a biopic, pretty much. Like it's just this.
Yeah.
It's an overly dramatized. It's like it's dramatized to a capital D. Pretty much, like like it's this movie is just like it's just a overexposed I guess you could say, way that this is like a whole Weird Al's life is portrayed. A lot of this is just nonsense. A lot of it is just parody. A lot of it is just it's way, way, way over the top. And even like it's just it's so the fact that even Daniel Radcliffe is there in front and center is so jarring in itself. You aren't supposed to take this overly seriously. Pretty much.
Yeah, and it just goes even higher with the over-the-top insanity when Madonna enters into the picture.
Oh, this is crazy. I actually genuinely want to know how Madonna feels about her appearance, quote unquote, in this film. Has she ever commented about it?
I'm actually really curious. I'm really curious about what Madonna thinks about this because Weird Al and Madonna, by the way, spoilers, they never had a relationship. Like, never. I mean, even though this was in the original Funny or Die short, yeah, Weird Al Yankovic and Madonna never had like a crazy loving relationship like that. I mean, sure, it is true that Weird Al did do a parody of her song Like a Surgeon with Like a Virgin, but yeah, the whole thing about like Madonna influencing him to taking drugs and drinking alcohol, no, that never happened.
Mm-hmm. So
no, but seriously, like Evan Rachel Wood as Madonna, she really hits it as like the 80s Madonna with the hair and the clothes and her mannerisms, like just trying to coax Weird Al into writing a song based off of one of her songs. And yeah, just like doing it in such a really, really like seductive way that Weird Al just doesn't know what to think of it.
Well, she basically just the way that she's portrayed in this movie is that she's using Weird Al to like push her own career pretty much. And so, like that's how it's all portrayed in that. And you got you got like the girl who comes in to like take advantage of the fact that this guy. It kind of I gotta be honest, it's a really awful comparison, but it kind of reminds me of Shark Tale when Oscar gets becomes the Shark Slayer and becomes really popular, and then all of a sudden, like the fish played by what's her name?
I think it was Angelina Jolie.
Angelina Jolie, there we go. Yeah, so it sort of reminds me of that. I'll tell you what, though, one thing I'll say about Madonna, the Madonna at least back in the '80s really does make you miss doesn't make you miss that Madonna compared to the Madonna that we have now.
I don't know.
Yeah. So I'm just reading here. Apparently, according to Distractify, apparently Madonna never actually gave her permission or approval for a portrayal in the Weird Al Yankovic movie. So she never apparently gave the permission for her to be in this movie.
I mean, to be quite honest, did anybody give their permission to have their likenesses portrayed?
Yeah. I'm really surprised this didn't turn into a Borat situation. Like, the amount of people that ended up in this movie, and like, I'm surprised people weren't asking like for their own slice of the pie.
Well, here's the difference. You see, they didn't know that it was going to be a movie. And a lot of the people who were being interviewed were the legit people. There weren't actors portraying as the legit people. So yeah, we're talking about a huge difference between Borat and Weird Al.
So, according to BuzzFeed, I'm actually just looking here now, apparently 27% of this movie is actually true. So there is some truth.
It is. I mean, it is true that there have been some liberties taken into Weird Al's story, which of course, but there were some things that were actually true, like the scene in which when Weird Al and his friends were recording a demo tape in the bathroom, which that actually did happen. The scene in which when Weird Al and Dr. Demento first met up and Dr. Demento decides to take him under his wing. That actually happened. And yeah, there was just a lot of like little sprinkles of factual events that made it into this movie. And of course, the whole like Weird Al dating Madonna and his father not approving and forcing him to work at the factory. No, that didn't actually happen.
Yeah. So apparently what's true in this, so the door-to-door salesman story apparently was true. So that spot is
we mentioned that earlier. Yes.
Yeah. The night Bologna was recorded in a public restroom, which is not in a public bus stop. That's what.
Yeah. That was actually true.
That was, and also the Dr. Demento stuff was also true as well. That in itself was correct. And according to this, the percussion on Another One Rides the Bus is actually from Al's drummer John Bermuda Schwartz, hitting an accordion case with what was shown in the movie. So, like, apparently that stuff was also true as well.
Yes.
Also, in regards to, by the way, Al Yankovic did not have a drug and alcohol issue, and that's caused a turbulent phase in his career. That was not true. by the
No,
way.
as mentioned earlier, his family was very, very religious, so he never partake in drugs or alcohol.
Exactly, yeah. So that stuff wasn't true when he was portrayed in the movie, and apparently, apparently Oprah did interview Weird Al, but in the real interview, it definitely had a slightly different vibe compared to the how he was portrayed in the movie. So apparently, Oprah has interviewed Weird Al in the past.
Okay, well, I guess this must have been when Oprah was just starting then.
Maybe, I'm not too sure. So yeah. So also this whole thing with Madonna, by the way, Madonna did not pursue Weird Al Yankovic to do the song parody like a virgin. So and
Yeah, and not even remotely close.
yeah, exactly. So all of that is bullshit. Apparently, according to this. So,
I mean, I imagine it would have been like one of the weird relationships that you would have seen like Entertainment Tonight. It's like, coming up on Entertainment Tonight, Madonna and Weird Al Yankovic make it over to the red carpet. Are they dating? Find out.
yeah,
That would have been really weird.
mind you, now that this movie's come out, I guarantee you, Madonna's probably going to get being bombarded with like questions of like, what's your relationship with Weird Al back in the day? Oh, good grief.
That would be really funny. I would love to see her responses to that.
Well, if you're looking forward to reinventing yourself again, Madonna, you can always be Weird Al Yankovic's girlfriend.
Wow, that would be insane. I doubt that'll ever happen, but that would be insane.
Nah, well, I've seen weirder things happen.
Fair enough, fair enough. Anyway, so continuing on with the story. So, yeah, Madonna basically has gotten a chokehold onto Weird Al in how he's portraying himself. Drinking, doing drugs, acting like a dick towards everybody that is rooting for him. His band members quit. Dr. Demento leaves him. And so he has practically nobody but Madonna. And he even performs while he's incredibly intoxicated and drugged. And he even had to go to the hospital just so that they can be able to revive him. And it's funny enough.
Oh yeah, well that's how we start the movie pretty much.
There's actually that's how the movie begins. And one of the doctors is Lin-Manuel Miranda. Oh my god.
Yeah, it sort of reminded me like it was kind of a callback to remember in Hot Fuzz when Peter Jackson was the guy who stabbed Nicholas Angel as Father Christmas.
Yes, I remember.
Yeah, so it feels like a callback to that a little bit, really.
Yeah. So he was pretty much revived from the dead, and he even got up and he said, "I need to be on the stage in 45 minutes." So he went from being almost practically dead from a car accident when he was incredibly intoxicated to now performing in the stage, and everybody is cheering him on. He's acting like a complete jerk to everybody, saying about like, "I'm the one who's talented. I'm the one who's weird. You guys are nothing but sheep." And then people are just like cheering for him, like, I'm sorry, what planet are we on?
Yeah, again, like this, you can definitely tell like this was kind of like portrayed from like Weird Al's kind of like ego, if you will. If he had an ego to begin with, or something like that. I don't know. It's just it's so abstract. Like it's just again, it's weird, So
Yes, it is very weird. And then we have probably one of the weirdest scenes in this movie, hands down. Madonna gets kidnapped by Pablo Escobar because Weird Al wouldn't perform for his birthday party.
Yeah, and so then I don't know. It's interesting that I mean, is this a throwback to UHF, like the whole thing of him going through the jungle?
This is a clear throwback. Exactly, this is a clear throwback to UHF. We're literally at the beginning of the movie where it's a parody of Rambo and Platoon, where he's just like sneaking into the jungle and he's just shooting everybody.
Yeah. Oh, I thought it was Indiana Jones he was parodying.
That too, yeah. There was a lot of parodies in that movie.
Yeah, there was, and so I mean, it did feel like a bit of a callback to that in a way.
It did. I'm really, really disappointed that there was no scene in the movie where Weird Al is making UHF. I would have loved to have seen that.
Yeah.
Where his ego
I think this was more about his music and not about like his. I mean, keep in mind like his time in film never really took off. Like his contributions to filmography is actually quite lacking when you really think about it. He's at UHF. I mean, he's done a cameo here, a cameo there, and then after that he did Captain Underpants, the first movie. But besides that. Like, he's been more known for his parodies than he has been known for his contributions to film.
Yeah, I guess that's true. When it comes to film and television, Film was very, very limited. UHF really took a turn on his career to the point in which he had that 3-year career slump until eventually Smells Like Nirvana pretty much brought him back. And I guess for the most part, when you think of Weird Al in television, there was the Weird Al show from the 90s, and then there was all of the voiceover that he did over the years. He was in Scooby Doo, he was in My Little Pony Friendship is Magic, he did Milo's Murphy Law. So, yeah, he's done a lot of voiceover more than film. And, this and UHF were the only films that he wrote and directed. And, of course, that parody movie from the 80s. But, yeah, for the most part, yeah, his filmography is lacking. But still, I would have liked to have seen a scene in the movie where Weird Al's ego is so high within himself and he's up his own ass where he thinks he can make a movie. Like, okay, he's already done the music, now he's gonna do a film, the film becomes a bomb, and now he's at his lowest point ever. I would have loved to have seen at least maybe a smidge of that. But I guess that little tiny homage to UHF where he sneaks into the jungle to save Madonna, I guess that's fine with me, but still I would have loved to have seen that.
I say his notable contributions to the film, I mean, from what I can see, obviously is UHF, but then there's the Naked Gun movies, and then there's Teen Titans Go.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, Teen Titans Go, cinematic masterpiece, better than freaking Vertigo and Citizen Kane.
Apparently so.
Anyway, what are we talking about? Oh yeah, Pablo Escobar. So the biggest drug lord of the 80s wants Weird Al Yankovic to perform at his birthday party. And he was so desperate for it that he kidnapped Madonna just so that could happen. And Weird Al goes into a shooting spree and kills everyone, including Pablo Escobar. So, no, people, Pablo Escobar wasn't murdered, due to the police force and the government and all that kind of stuff. No, he was actually killed by Weird Al Yankovic.
Makes sense. Yeah, so
God.
Kind of remind me of Pineapple Express a little bit, that scene. Like him
it is a little bit like
guns
that,
blazing, and I mean, again, like also, I mean, we also like blaze over like the fact when Madonna got kidnapped. That's apparently, they even gave Daniel Radcliffe a fight scene in this movie. Like, imagine saying you're gonna play Weird Al Yankovic and you're gonna basically have like a bar fight scene.
Like, what?
Yeah, it's
seriously,
it's crazy.
And then the cherry on top, the piece de resistance, the beautiful moment where when Pablo Escobar dies, and then Weird Al and Madonna are free, and then Weird Al tells Madonna that they need to get out of there, and Madonna basically is saying, "Why don't we just take over? You can be the leader of this huge drug lord group. We can rule the world." And Weird Al's like, "No, Dr. Demento was right. You are a manipulator." So he leaves, and then Madonna becomes the queen of drugs. No, she's not the queen of pop. Yeah, exactly. She's not the queen of pop. No, she's the queen of cocaine.
She's portrayed so negatively in this movie. Like, I mean, who hates Madonna this much? Like,
I have no idea.
Yeah, it's like it's I don't know if I mean, again, I'm out of the loop in regards to the Madonna. The last time I heard that she was trying to reinvent herself again, she was like doing like all these risque photos and stuff like that. It's like it's 60 years old. Pretty much, like, it's I mean, whatever. But I mean, like, it's in regards to the way that she's portrayed in this movie, like, wow, like, who made the call to like say she's gonna basically be like this really awful antagonist, pretty much. For this movie. The one thing I'll say about this, actually moving away from Madonna, is that, have you noticed that this movie does so many, like, not generic tropes, but it does so many, like, the lines, like, the growing up story, like, the parents that don't believe that he can do it and are just trying to protect him, the scenes where he gets into trouble with, like, the police, and then, he ends up in trouble with his parents again, and that ends up, creating further conflict. The fact that, he's down on his luck when he begins, and then all of a sudden he gets that big, massive break, and then we get to the point where all the fame he finally gets, and it all goes to his head, and he ends up pushing his friends away, and ends up in this toxic relationship with our antagonist, and then all of a sudden, like, he loses everything, but then, he gets this inspiration to, like, gain everybody back again, and realizes the error of his ways and stuff like that. Like, this is all generic storytelling that you could find pretty much in the vast majority of movies, but for whatever reason, this all works.
It does work because you would see all of these tropes or most of them in a lot of music biopics. And I guess this is what Weird Al's direction was, where, okay, maybe his life was not like this extravagantly over the top and tragic, but in order for it to parody a lot of the music biopics that we have seen, where you have the musicians taking drugs and alcohol, or losing everything and gaining everything back, or the tragic backstories, or the unhappy endings where they die. Yeah, spoiler alert, Weird Al dies in this movie. It's almost like La Bamba or Selena or Freddie Mercury from Queen, in which they died tragically at a very young age, just when they were getting their careers going.
Yeah, it's well. By the way, before we get to that, I mean, like he does make up with his dad. Like he does end up going back to the factory when it all falls apart, and then him have like By the way, I kind of like this. This kind of reminded me like the talk that Remy and his father had like in the movie Ratatouille when his father realizes how talented like Remy actually is, and he goes, "Hey, I was wrong about you and your friend." And then we get that scene in the factory, and that motivates our hero to basically go back to continue what he's doing.
Yeah.
So actually, that was actually quite a touching scene, even how ridiculous it was.
Yeah,
Like
and it just the over the top moment where we find out why his father was acting this way to Weird Al is just brilliant. Where it turns out that he came from an Amish community where he is raised by people who are really, really normal. Just if you've seen the Amish, you know how they are. They're this really simple people who live a simple life of farming, and they're very, very restricted to a lot of modern amenities like cell phones and technology and all that kind of stuff. They dress very plainly, and they have very, very religious ideals. So it turns out that the father was playing the accordion and everybody banished him. And so he tried to make it out into the big city. He was a failure, and so he had nothing left. So eventually he found the work at the factory. He was able to stay there for pretty much his entire working life. He met up with his wife, and then he had Al, and he tried to lead into this whole moral about like, don't do what I did, follow your dreams. And he even shows that under his working clothes was the Hawaiian shirt. And I'm just like, beautiful, just amazing, wonderful.
yeah, and even at the point like he actually did say that he wrote a song and he gave it to Weird Al Yankovic, and he ended up using that in his as one of his pieces.
Yeah, he
So
did.
yeah.
So, I mean, this is okay. Here's one nitpick that I did have in this movie. So, when Weird Al reunites with his parents for the first time in years after being estranged from them, and that was when we learn about how his father wrote lyrics to the song, and it turned out to be Amish Paradise. And then his mother gained weight and said, like, I'm fat, I know it. It's like, oh, wait, this is where Weird Al gets that inspiration for that song, and he's going to perform it, right? He never does.
Well, I
And I'm
mean,
like,
maybe it was too obvious. Maybe I don't know. Oh,
I
okay.
guess so, but still, I mean, it would have made sense in the timeline that he would have sung that song as opposed to Amish Paradise, which he sung in the mid 90s when he was just in the midst of his second comeback.
Well, again, this movie's all over the place pretty much. I mean, like the only thing that kind of like is staying structurally sound basically is the fiction. Would you believe?
Yeah, but they
Out
had
of
to
everything.
make his they had to make his mom gain weight for the sake of an incomplete joke.
Yeah. Oh well. I mean, like, it should, but besides that, I mean, we get to the end of the movie, and obviously he gets assassinated by Madonna at the very end of it, which again, like, what is this hatred with Madonna? And then we get to the credits, and would you believe this is probably like the most true part of the movie, the end credits, where they actually go through his photo reel of like him with his family, and him like on the road, and like him doing like all these songs and things like that. Like just it's surprisingly like the truest part of the movie is probably the end credits.
Well, I
So
mean, some of the end credits. I mean,
some of
there's
them,
still a
yeah.
lot of the other ones, like, the pictures of him and Madonna and the pictures of him with Pablo. So, yeah, that stuff was like obviously Photoshop. But
Hmm.
yeah, for the most part, the early photos of him as a kid with his accordion and him with his parents, that stuff was true. Yeah.
Yeah, and then we get this extra scene where Madonna goes to like lay flowers at Weird Al's grave, and then like his arm comes out from the grave, and like I don't know if like this was like a nod to like the Addams Family or like Deadpool when he
I think
finally
it was,
sees
I
Wolverine's
think it was
grave.
kind of like a nod to like Thriller. You know how like in the scene in which when the zombies come out and then they start like haunting everybody and dancing.
I'm not sure. But well, I mean, like you can't put Weird Al down apparently, according to the other movie. So, I mean, is this hinting that we're going to get a sequel? I have no idea. But I mean, at the moment, just to cap off on this, Weird Al Yankovic on Roku is actually doing really well. It's like one of the most watched movies actually on Roku right now. According
Yeah.
to yeah, so and right now it has like it's fresh on Rotten Tomatoes. It has a really good audience score. I mean, given what we've got here, I mean, dare I say, would Weird Al go out and do it again with Daniel
Hmm.
Radcliffe? I don't know.
I don't know. Is he going to do a sequel to this movie? Is he going to do another film? I'm not sure. I mean, I'm hoping that this movie would turn out to be a much better final product as opposed to what happened with UHF.
Yeah, well, I mean, like I think we can agree. I don't know. Like I actually prefer this movie over UHF. To be
Oh,
honest with you,
really?
yeah. Like I think that's okay, when we first heard about it, I thought, oh, hey, we're going to finally get, like, a behind-the-scenes, idea of, like, what was going on with Weird Al at the time. But, no, it's like, dare I say, dare I say the fake stories actually turned out to be better than that. So yeah, like
Yeah.
I mean, here's the thing, like it's a good put together movie. Like it's got great actors who are casted really well. It's got a great story behind it, and it's the whole story about a kid following his dreams and getting taken over by fame, and then having to deal with all of that. Like the story's done really well in my opinion. So, like, I would, advise, people to, go see this movie because it's, if you have a Roku stick, then, what are you waiting for? Go watch it, you know?
Yeah,
So,
exactly. Yeah. And if you do want to see a legit Weird Al Yankovic biography of him, then I think that
it's
what
not
was it?
this movie.
Yeah, it's not this movie, first of all. And I believe that either VH1 or MTV did like a 40-minute documentary with like, interviews from his friends and his colleagues and his family about Weird Al. So I would just suggest to look that up on YouTube. But if you are looking like for a theatrical biopic of Weird Al Yankovic, don't watch this movie.
Definitely
But
not.
if you want to see a parody of biopics with Weird Al, then definitely watch this movie.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely up there with the parody biopics that we've seen in the past, pretty much. Like, it's definitely worth a watch. So.
Absolutely. And if you are one of those people who really loved UHF, you will really love Weird the Al Yankovic movie.
And you
Oh,
can see how much we loved it because we've got a whole hour on this. So.
yes, exactly. So that just goes to show you about how much we enjoyed this movie. All right, then. So that is it for our discussion of Weird, the Al Yankovic movie. Aaron, thank you so much for coming on by.
Yeah, anytime.
All right, so please plug and promote your stuff.
You can follow me on, well, so long as Twitter stays alive. It's Arun Mehta Show, ARUNMEHTASHOW. I will soon be back on YouTube and Instagram by popular demand. I'll let everyone know about that in later time. But for the meantime, just keep following me on the podcast feed. Just search the Arun Mehta Show, and I'm on there.
And as for me, you can check out my work at oldschoollane.net, youtube.com/oldschoollane, facebook.com/oldschoollane. I'm on Twitter for how long that lasts at Patty_B_Miranda. You can check out the podcast on Anchor, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Radio Public, all those places. New episodes of the podcast will go there first, and then they'll go up in a few days on YouTube. If you haven't checked out all the other stuff that we've been doing, I've been doing the 25 Days of Christmas Advent podcast with my sister Carlene. I've been taking a look into my favorite Christmas movies with quick Christmas classic look back and looking at adaptations based off of the classic short story Story, Christmas Every Day by William Dean Howells. So, yes, please check out my YouTube channel if you have been out of the loop for quite a while. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. Let us know in the comments below about your thoughts on Weird, the Yankovic movie. What did you think of the movie? Did you like it? Did you not like it? Would you recommend people to check it out? Do you want to see Weird Al do some more films, or do you think that 2 movies was more than enough for him? That's it. Hope to see you around soon, and take care.